Okay, so my name's Carrie Connell, and I'm one of the nutritionists at Crossroads Medical in Ellicott City. And in addition to talking about food all day with my clients and patients, I love to go outside and get my own food. It's become a little bit of an obsession, I will say, but I think a healthy one at that. I mean, if I really think about it, it's getting me outside for some vitamin D, some exercise. I'm getting probably much more nutrients than I would if I were to buy these foods. Not probably, definitely, and I'll share some of that research with you. So how many of you out there are going outside looking for foods, picking foods so far? Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up. Yeah, one person so far?
I
Okay.
did a little last year. I was using the Lost Book of Herbal Remedies to kind of help me identify.
Ah,
But I
yeah.
haven't done anything this year. So
Okay. Well, hopefully this will inspire you to go out there. I think I picked a good time for this class because pretty much everything that we're going to go over today is up right now, which is super exciting. So you can put a salad together maybe this evening with what you find out there. For those of you that don't want to take yourself off mute or put your video on, you can just communicate with me through the chat as well. So, oh, hi, Sherry. Yes, I see you in the chat there. All right, glad to have you. All right, back here. So, well, why wild foods? I mean, I think I already talked about the fact that it's a great form of exercise. You're getting out there, you're moving around, you're getting sunshine and vitamin D, which is great for mental health and mood. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great dopamine rush when you are out there looking for something and you find it and you know it's free and it's yours. So I think about it as an adult Easter egg hunt. But outside of that aspect, there's immense nutrition that we find when we eat these wild foods versus these store-bought foods. Over the course of human evolution, as we moved from a hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural society, we started taking seeds, preserving our seeds for the next year's crops, and selecting them based on how the appearance looked and how the flavor was, and the consistency of that crop. So if you had a delicious tomato that was just like the best you ever had, but maybe it didn't produce that much, chances are you wouldn't save that seed. You would save the seed from the plant that produced a whole lot. And if you're lucky, it also tasted good. But you can imagine over the course of years, hundreds of years of this kind of preserving of seeds of foods that are just pretty consistent, it basically watered down the nutritional content of the ancestral foods. For example, onions, wild onions, which we'll talk about in a little bit, look really different than our store-bought onions. And if we look at the nutrition from the wild to the store-bought, it doesn't even look like the same plant. So while none of us can really survive on 100% wild foods, I try every year, but there's no way. I think we can augment our diet with a little bit of wild foods to get that extra oomph nutritionally. So when we compare the store-bought to the wild foods, we see increases in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. We get many more antioxidants. And then there's these other chemicals that are not vitamins or minerals. We call them phytochemicals. They're specific to plants. And they happen to be things that we call, or you hear a lot about, anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, antioxidant, anti all this, bad stuff. So these phytochemicals are the things that humans use for medicine these days, and these wild foods are just stock full of them. Oh yeah, it's super practical to learn this stuff too, especially last year when I first started teaching classes like this. People were afraid to go to the grocery store, right? We're running out of fresh food. People were doing a lot of canned food, a lot of shelf-stable food. So last year when lockdown happened in April, instead of going to the grocery store, I just would go out to the backyard and pick some chickweed and make salads with that. So it got me to be a lot more practical with my my diet at home. So let's start with safety, because there's definitely some things that we need to cover before we talk about all the good things that you can pick and eat. So the first thing, and I'll probably say it several times today, is that you don't want to eat anything, never ever eat anything that you haven't properly identified. I think that goes without saying, but I have to say it anyway. So for me personally, when I'm looking to understand a new plant, at first I'll look at it and it'll probably ring familiar. But the second thing I do is consult 2 or 3 expert sources to help me really identify that. So some examples of places that you could use to ID your plant or mushroom or whatever it is online forums. I'll go over those later. Field guides, you could be old school about it and bring a book out there. Expert help is another one. So sending me emails. I would not call myself an expert, but I can certainly help point you towards better identification. But learning in your community, if there's people who do this often, there's wonderful Facebook groups that are Maryland based if you're on social media that you can become a part of and then use these people who are really just knowledgeable in this field as your allies. So a couple of things about trying wild foods. Now, like I said, they are brimming with nutrients and they are brimming with other things too, mostly good. But with that said, it's important that you try new wild foods the first time in only a small amount. So if you're harvesting nettles, for example, maybe just a few leaves. Or if you're harvesting flowers like redbud, maybe just 1 or 2 flowers. With mushrooms, 1 or 2. So extremely small amounts the first time, and only try 1 new wild food at a time. So that way, if you have an adverse reaction, it's not going to be as great of a reaction as if you had a pound of nettles. But you could also then trace it to the source, because if you had nettles and morels, you may not know which one made you sick. So allergies to these, they're possible, they're rare, but what's more common is GI upset. Typically though, when you're cooking wild foods, the chances of GI upset go down. So I'll try to be clear with you guys about which ones I really recommend cooking and which ones you don't have to cook. For example, the ones that you definitely want to cook are going to be stinging nettles, which you see a picture of right here. Any mushroom, all mushrooms. In fact, all the mushrooms at the grocery store that are at the salad bar raw, you really shouldn't be eating those raw. Number one, you can't digest raw mushrooms, so you basically lose out on all the good nutrition in them. And 2, there are some compounds in there that are not so great for us in their raw state, but they get denatured when they're cooked. Fiddlehead ferns, sometimes you'll see those in the grocery store, but you can also look for them locally. And then watercress. Watercress grows in the water, and as long as you know what that water source is coming from, if it's a spring that you're familiar with, it's okay to eat it raw, but most of us aren't going to know where the water source comes from. Like, for example, is it downstream from a farm? So in those cases where we're collecting watercress from an unknown water source, I would absolutely recommend cooking. But everything else I'm going to go over today, you can eat raw. So another thing of safety here, pack some gloves because these are nettles. And if you run into nettles in the woods, you are definitely going to want to have gloves on. You know, nettles are cool in that they're used actually for rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, joint pain by like rubbing the area that's inflamed, but man, it hurts. So it helps though, because it brings all this blood to the area of the inflammation, and that can really help people's pain. But if you're not looking for that old school pain relief, you're going to want to wear gloves for sure. And then last, wash everything. Some of these greens you're going to need to wash once or twice or even 3 times. At the end, I will show you my favorite salad spinner that I use for all of my foraged greens. Okay, and then one other thing here with safety, you should really know what poison ivy looks like. You see that nasty little fella in the top right? Yeah, that's my nemesis. Every year, no matter how hard I try, I get a severe outbreak of poison ivy and have to go on steroids, and it's not good. This year, hopefully, I'm not going to get it. It is everywhere in Maryland. You really need to know how to identify it. So leaves of three, let it be. That's the old saying. So as you can see, this has 3 leaves. And then one of the distinguishing features on it is, I know it's a little hard to see, but there's a little, it looks like a mitten to me, an upside down mitten where this is the thumb and these are the other fingers. See, here's the little stick out here. Here's the thumb, here's the fingers. So the outer leaves kind of look like this with the thumb sticking out, and then you have a middle leaf. It's not always shiny red like you've been taught. It can be bright green, it can be lime green. If it's leaves of 3 and it has that mitten shape, run away. So another thing that we need to keep in mind is where we're foraging, because there are rules, there are laws, there's just basic etiquette that we should be aware of. So public land versus private land. Obviously, if it's private land, you need permission. If it's your own private land, invite me over. If it's public land, there's differences between state and national parks. So national parks, you cannot remove anything from a national park. So keep that in mind. State parks, it kind of varies, but you can check Patapsco's website. Pretty much it's okay to harvest for personal consumption. There are a couple things that you probably want to stay away from, and I'll get to that in a moment. So once you figure out where you are and establish if you're safe, no poison ivy, you want to think about, is the area clean? Because ultimately you're going to be consuming these foods. And a lot of foods, particularly mushrooms, are bioaccumulators. So they have this ability to sponge in things from their surroundings. So we want to make sure the areas we're harvesting from are clean. So some of the things I stay away from would be roadsides, golf courses, because there's a lot of pesticides being sprayed there, train tracks, and then anything downhill or maybe downstream of like a farm or a development or an industrial site, because all that runoff is going to come down into your little patch. Let's see, there's a question about BOE russet, any issues? What's BOE? I'm not familiar with that. Board of Education land. That sort of, I don't know, I'd have to look into that. Board of Education seems like it would be private. Well, it could be state too. Hey, Adele.
Hi there.
Okay, oh, it's a county-owned land. You know what? We'd have to do a little Googling to find out. There are some plants that no one will care if you pick them. For example, invasive plants like garlic mustard and Japanese knotweed, you could probably pick them on national parks because they're basically taking over so much of our land and killing the native plants. So I know you'd probably be fine getting garlic mustard from the BOE land. Okay, so, well, once you know where you are, if you're safe, if the surrounding area is clean, then you move on to the next part where you're going to identify it and or pick it. So etiquette-wise, if you're not sure what the plant is, the best practice in terms of sustainability is just to take a picture of it for the first time. Take a mental note where you are. You can always go back for it, but you don't want to be digging things up that potentially are endangered. So go for the photo. Oh, I'm sorry, this poison ivy is taking over my notes here, but under here it says that there's an app called iNaturalist, and it's a wonderful app. It's very good at plant identification. So you can take a photo and it'll give you some options of what it might be. And 99% of the time, it is what it is. It's really neat. And then there is a group under here. It says Forage Maryland, and that's a Facebook group that's very welcoming to beginners. And they're great for real-time help. So you can literally be on Facebook, take a picture, ask for identification, and you can get at least one source of ID. So remember, I was saying with the new food, I like to do 3 sources of ID, maybe a book, maybe a forum, and maybe iNaturalist. Okay, so now you're at the point where you know what it is and you intend on picking it. So keep in mind, We really don't want to harvest more than we can use for personal consumption. It's not just us that think the plants are yummy. Fauna, animals, I'm sorry, and insects, they're all dependent on this food as well. And for the most part, we want these foods to come back every year. I say for the most part because there's those couple of plants that are completely taking over our native areas, like the garlic mustard. So remember, pick as much as you want of garlic mustard. So if you're really getting into this and there's this plant or food that you love, it's probably a good idea to read up on the environmental status of it and how to sustainably harvest. I just don't have enough time and in this presentation to go through each one in their status, but I'll try to point out where things are wishy-washy or where things may be an issue. Ramps, for example. Ramps are coming up right now, and if you've been to any restaurant in the past 10 years that's somewhat trendy, I'm sure you've seen ramps on the menu. Chefs just go wild about them, no pun intended. Ramps are wild onions or wild garlic. They kind of taste like both, but they're endangered here, and it's actually illegal to harvest them on public land. However, if you have your own land and they're growing, or you know someone who has them on their land, you can harvest them. However, you're going to want to know how to sustainably harvest them because it takes 7 years for a ramp to grow from seed to full plant. And so with those, we're just clipping the leaves. We're not digging up the bulbs. Okay, and then just generally thinking about percentages when you see things. So it's a good idea if you see like a big patch of nettles, for example, to try to only take about 10% of that whole patch there, leave the rest behind. If you are looking at one plant that has multiple edibles on it, like a fiddlehead fern, for example, one plant puts up, say, 8 to 10 fiddlehead ferns. Think about only taking 50% of what's on that single plant. That way it has enough to continue growing. So those aren't set in stone. Those are sort of just after years of doing this and talking with other foragers. These are, rules we've come up with. Okay, we went over that. So let's talk about that first one, that garlic mustard. Now this is everywhere. So I'm sure every single one in this class is going to be able to go out, whether it's today or this weekend, and find this and be able to eat it. It is extremely invasive, like I said, so you can pull it up by the root, as you see me pulling up right here. You get that whole root there. Now the roots aren't very substantial, but you can eat them. The roots sort of taste a little bit like horseradish, but you're not going to get a meal out of it. What you do get a lot of are these green leaves. So this is a plant where you can absolutely eat it raw, or you can cook with it. And one nutritional thing that stands out for me with this one is just the vitamin C content. Gram for gram, so 10 grams of garlic mustard versus 10 grams of citrus. There's so much more vitamin C in the garlic mustard. So vitamin C gets degraded when we cook it. So if we want to get the vitamin C out of this, if that's what we're looking for, this is something we're going to want to eat raw. So you can harvest them when they're small. This one, it's kind of hard to tell, but you see the ground is right there. So it's only like maybe 5 inches above the ground. And this one here is a lot bigger. You can see my hand versus the leaf. So as they get bigger, they get a little less tender. Right now is the perfect time. They came up a couple of weeks ago. They're still kind of small. You'll see some that have a flower on them. This is a second year growth. So this is a first year growth. So the seed dropped last year, and now this year, this is coming up for the first time. When this dies back, the second year, the flower will shoot up. So people will say that the first year growth is more tender, but I've had both and they're both great. One of the things to think about though is if you like it, maybe you can harvest quite a bit now and make it into pesto. That's number one thing that people do with this, and then freeze it. Because as the summer gets hotter and hotter, the garlic mustard gets a little bit less flavorful or a little more bitter. Some of the other components come out that people generally don't like. So you can also just puree this and put it in ice cube trays And throughout the whole year, you can throw an ice cube tray of this into a stir fry or a saute. And it's almost like adding garlic to the stir fry as opposed to adding regular garlic. And then instead of a pesto, if that's not something you like to do, you can, if you're making spinach or kale or sauteing any green, you can throw a handful of this green in there as well. And then another nutritional spotlight here is vitamin A. We all know vitamin A is crucial for our eyes, reproductive health, but our gut lining. You know, a lot of research is coming out about how important gut health is, whether or not you have gut symptoms, to overall health. And vitamin A is a crucial nutrient that we need to maintain a good gut lining. So when we compare this one gram per gram with spinach, this has much more vitamin A. So imagine a stir fry with spinach and garlic mustard, and you're doing really well nutritionally there for your gut. A couple other things for identification. These little flowers are edible, and they're really pretty and cute. They're always going to have 4 blooms on them, 4 petals, that is. And this is in the same family as broccoli, so the Brassica family. So it has relatives like kale and cabbage and cauliflower. And this whole family is known for having high amounts of something called sulforaphane, this phytochemical that has potential anti-cancer, cardiovascular, and metabolic benefits. So not only does it have a good flavor, but you're getting all these medicinal benefits as well. In your slides, we've got several clickable links here. We've got a green chimichurri. This one is a lot more exciting to me than a regular pesto. Chimichurri has usually smoked paprika or oregano in it, and it's great on proteins, grilled proteins. If you're vegetarian, it's great mixed into things like rice or quinoa to make it more interesting. There's also a couple of pesto recipes, one in incorporating the root. So if you pull up a big one and that root is actually substantial, you can throw that root into the pesto. And then of course, just a simple saute. This recipe that I've linked here, it actually calls for garlic, but since this is garlic mustard, I made a note to just omit the garlic. It would be too garlicky if you added garlic as well. Any questions on garlic mustard, and has anyone had it before? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not the most delicious thing, but when you cook it with other things, it becomes delicious. So I would suggest if you're going to do the pesto recipe, add basil with it.
I know you said it was very invasive, but does it grow in certain places? Like, where are you looking for it most likely?
Oh my goodness, I just walked down the busy road today and I saw it on the side of the road. So it's in the forest, it's in the yards, it's really one that could be anywhere, coming up through cracks.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. This one is watercress, and this one is going to be very specific to waterways. So you'll see it growing in streams and anywhere that there's flowing water. You might see it in stagnant water, but you don't want to harvest anything from stagnant water. It should be free flowing water. So this is also in that same family with garlic, mustard. So it's in that Brassica family with all the other high sulforaphane foods. This doesn't really taste like garlic mustard or cabbage. It has more of a pepper flavor, which is interesting. Gram per gram, it contains many more antioxidants than kale. Like kale doesn't even look cool compared to watercress. This just blows everything out of the water. No pun intended again. So as I was saying before, you really want to make sure this is coming from clean water. And if you don't know where the water comes from, like for example, this picture here is my harvesting bag, and I have this little waterway that I harvest from. I don't actually know where this water comes from. I know it looks clean and it's free flowing, but I don't know what's upstream. There could be, worst case scenario, there's like a farm and there's animal feces running down into the water. So what I do with my watercress is I cook it. all of it. As much as I would love to eat it raw, I just don't know where it's coming from or the water, so I cook it. Thankfully, it still tastes really good cooked, and you can make a lot of great things, which I'll get into next with it. The question is, does it taste like nasturtiums? It does, yeah. It's a very peppery flavor. When you cook it, it mellows. So when you're harvesting this, you want to just use some scissors, and you can see here I've cleared a bit off above the water. So I'm not trying to go underneath the water because this will grow back. Within a couple of weeks, you'll start to see new growth coming up. So this is a really sustainable crop. Okay, so, oh, just a funny aside. Last year, my husband, who's a chef, was playing around with this watercress, and he made a pesto, and he deemed it watercresto. So I love that. You can also saute it like you would spinach, and you can also put it in soup. It's really good steamed with butter and lemon. So you really have to watch out, though, as a first-time forager or a beginner forager, because there are some lookalikes. And the one that looks most like it is called lesser celandine. And it's everywhere. This is also terribly invasive. Unfortunately, it's not edible, so we can't really eat it up. But this is a picture of what a lot of the Patapsco State Park looks like right now. All of this green with yellow flower is toxic lesser celandine. It's in the buttercup family. Here's a close-up of it. So it has these little leaves, and it has this flower. This is a real picture of it. And below it is watercress. So some of the differences we see, well, in the flowering stage, watercress is always white. So if you see yellow flowers, you know, not watercress. Another thing is that each stem has one leaf for the lesser celandine, whereas with watercress, let me go back up here, each stem actually is going to have several leaves coming off of it. And habitat-wise, watercress is going to be growing in the water, whereas this stuff will grow most likely close to water, but it's not going to actually be in the water. It might be at the edge. Here's a lookalike that's actually edible and everywhere. Again, on my walk down this busy road at lunchtime today, I saw this coming out of a lot of mulch beds, literally pushing all this mulch up, and out comes the chickweed. So there's a couple of varieties of chickweed. I think that this one is the best flavored one. So in terms of appearance, it's usually, it comes out in a center cluster and then it all fans out. And this one that we're looking at, this species media, it's very smooth to touch. It's almost like, well, it's like spinach. There's another chickweed that's really furry, and you would know, you would feel it, and it would feel furry. So I don't love to eat that one as much just because the texture is weird. But this chickweed is everywhere. It's very much like the garlic mustard, where you go out in the woods right now and you just see it. So with this one, there's a couple distinguishing features. It has a mohawk on it. These little hairs. It's only like one line of hair, and so we call it a mohawk. Also, when you break the stem apart, you see this little tooth floss thing inside of the stem. So that's very specific. With the flowers, you don't always see the flowers, but when they do flower, it looks like they have 10 petals, but those are actually 5 petals with a really deep ridge in between. So what I do with this stuff is throw it into salad. It's not growing in water, so I don't have the same concerns as I do with watercress. But what you want to do is you want to cut it from the top. So here's some, stems here, and above the red line is pretty much what I use. So I'll just go around and trim the tops off of them, because as you get lower to the bottom, it gets more tooth flossy, and it's not as great to chew. Yeah, someone said chickweed grows in all their grow bags. Yep, it's it's everywhere. It's amazing how strong it is. It just bursts right through mulch and wood chips and everything. But you know, it's great for a skin condition. So if anyone is dealing with red skin, itchy skin, eczema, psoriasis, in traditional herbal medicine, chickweed has been used for any kind of itchy red skin condition. Usually it's used as a tincture or a tea, but heck, there's so much of it, you can eat it every day, a little bit in your salads, or I put it as a garnish. As you can see, here's like a breakfast with a little garnish on top. You can make your food look pretty with it. So I picked out a few of my favorite recipes. We've got some glazed carrots and watercress. That's a really good one. Watercress soup. There's a chilled watercress and yogurt soup. So if you like gazpacho, that would be a good one for you. Buttered chickweed is very similar to the garlic mustard that you could, or the watercress. You just kind of steam it and add some butter and lemon. It's really good. Pesto, of course. And then, like I said, straight up in a salad. Okay, this I think is my favorite green. What I love about it, other than the fact that it's a nutritional superstar, is that when you saute it, it is like a sponge for whatever you cook it in. So I'll usually cook it in a little bit of olive oil and chicken stock, or a touch of butter and mushroom stock, and it just soaks in whatever it's cooked in. And when you take a bite, it's like an explosion of all the good stuff you cooked it in. I can't explain it other than that. I think you just have to try it. It's the only off-putting thing about it is that it's got a more of a texture versus spinach. You put it in your mouth and it's really like smooth. This has got a little texture, but I think the fact that it soaks in all that delicious stuff that you cook it in makes up for it 100%. So this is one of the most nutritionally dense plants in the world. Like gram for gram, it's got so many vitamins and minerals. So it's super high in calcium, magnesium, iron, folate, B vitamins, vitamins A and E. Now, because we cook this nettles, we have to cook this because of the stingers on it. We're not getting the vitamin C, right? Because I said vitamin C is destroyed by heat. However, I just found this recipe a couple of weeks ago that I'm trying. It's not really a recipe as much as a technique. So I took my nettles and I put them in a mason jar and covered it with apple cider vinegar. I'm going to let that sit for a couple of weeks. And already it's been a couple of days and my vinegar is starting to turn green. It's really cool. So I'm going to just use that nettle infused vinegar in my vinaigrettes, my salads, cooking with it. Maybe not cooking with it, but more in a raw preparation, because that's how I'm thinking I'm going to be able to get that vitamin C without having to cook these nettles. But other than that, I'm not really concerned that I'm losing it on vitamin C because we get it from so many other sources. So this is a fun one in that you can transplant it. This is my yard. I have this little pot out there, and I took a little grouping of nettles 5 or 6 years ago, and I put it in this pot. And every year it comes back. It's amazing. This is it's not a ceramic pot. I don't know what material it is, but it's not peat. But I think the roots have grown into the ground underneath it because I can't move it. So it's really hardy. It is a weed, right? So it'll do well anywhere. And nettles will last pretty well into like November, December, even January had some nettles still. So it's a really great plant to put in your yard. You just want to know that you need those gloves on when you go to harvest it, or you're going to be itching and stinging for a little bit. So in terms of the growth stage, this right here is a photo of a nettle that's probably midsummer. It starts to grow really tall and you get all of the little seeds, the flowers and the seeds that come off of it. At this point, these leaves would be really gnarly. It would be really too tough to enjoy. So what you could do if you have a patch in the woods that you know about and you can come back easily, is you can actually go down maybe a few inches off of the ground and cut that. And then in a couple weeks, you come back and there'll be smaller little nettle leaves coming off of it. Because really they're most tender. Up here, you can see what they look like when they're in their tender phase. So they're very, very toothy at that point. Versus when they get older, you don't see as much tooth to it. All right, what else do I want to tell you about nettles? Well, so as soon as heat hits it, the little stingers deactivate. So a simple saute, steaming. I really don't recommend boiling because if you do, you're going to lose all those good nutrients that I told you about. Unless you're making a soup and the soup is simmering and then you put the nettle leaves right in, that'll be fine because you're going to drink that broth from the soup anyway. In terms of herbal medicine, nettles is key. It has a really long history of use for inflammation, particularly of the joints. Like I was saying, some people like to hit their joints with stinging nettles and feel that sting. It brings a lot of oxygen to those areas. Also, we use it for upper respiratory health and allergies. And then there's some new research on nettle root and nettle seed helping to shrink prostates when they are overgrown and enlarged. And there's even human clinical studies on that, which is neat. Okay, some of my favorite nettle recipes. I mean, my favorite is the easiest one where I just saute it with butter and stock or olive oil and stock, salt, pepper, that's it. It's just ridiculously delicious. But if you want to get a little bit more fancy, here's a couple cool ideas for you. Here's an Indian type stew with potatoes and nettle. Lots of great anti-inflammatory spices in there. We're getting into asparagus season, so I want to add something with asparagus. Nettle chips. Here's a picture of nettle chips. So you've heard of kale chips. You can also do nettle chips. These up here are nettle fritters. And you can make a pesto too with mint. This one's kind of cool. But they tell you to boil the nettles. Remember what I just said, we would lose all that good nutrition if you boiled it. So I would steam the nettles and then make it into the pesto. Okay. Now, oh, someone had something to say about stinging nettles. They are a host plant for native butterflies. Awesome, yes. Wild onion and garlic. How many of you have had that from the yard? This is kind of everywhere, like dandelions. Yeah, you'll know what it is pretty much as soon as you pull it. You pull it up and you can smell it. You'll get that whiff of onion or garlic. Now, they're oftentimes mistaken for each other, but it's okay because they're both edible. Just make sure it smells very classically like onion or garlic because there is one shoot that comes up that looks a little bit like this bulb here that has no smell. That one is not, I don't think it's toxic, but it's not edible. So make sure it has that classic onion garlic smell. You can use just the greens on these and somewhat like scallions or chives. Or if you have bigger, more established plants, you can pull up the whole root and you can use them chopped up. So like I was saying in the very beginning, wild onion and garlic are, I wish I had the stats for you, but they are tremendously nutritionally dense compared to what we get in the grocery store. A Vidalia onion is delicious, don't get me wrong, but we've bred it to be that way. We've bred it to be big and sweet versus this is what the ancestor looks like. And I know I don't really have anything for scale there, but imagine that's the size of like maybe a quarter. So they've been bred to be big and sweet, but these are still really delicious and full of the chemicals that we use, like allicin. It's a specific phytochemical we use to help lower blood pressure and to fight off bacteria, virus, any of the bad things we don't want in the body. So we'll get into flowers next. There's lots of flowers that you can eat. And in general, the flowers are going to be rich sources of vitamin C and antioxidants. And for the most part, we're using these flowers raw. So you're able to get that vitamin C from them. This one is up everywhere right now. Well, mostly, I guess, in the woods. I haven't really seen this on the sidewalk. But this one's called Spring Beauty, and it is beautiful. And one thing to know about this is that it looks a little bit like Star of Bethlehem, which is not edible. But the big difference is Star of Bethlehem has 6 petals, and you want to make sure your Spring Beauty has 5 petals. Now, Spring Beauty, as you can see, comes in different colors. It can be very pink, or it can be white. But it will have these striations, these lines running through them too. So these are lovely in salads, just as a garnish. Now, I always say we eat with our eyes first, and if our food looks beautiful, I think we have a better overall experience, even if it doesn't taste as good. So go ahead and doctor it up with beauty. How many of you have this in your yard or neighborhood? Yeah, this is really common, and it's really starting to bud right now. I love this one. So this is Eastern Redbud, and like I said, they're up right now. They're really starting to bloom right now, and I love them because they have a sour taste, slight sour taste. You know, a lot of flowers are sort of neutral, but this one has a really beautiful taste to it. And what's cool is you can take a little branch of a flowering tree, bring it home like I did, put it in a little container with water, and that'll stay fresh for you for 1 to 2 weeks. So each day you can freshly harvest a couple, throw it in your salad. Because technically, once you pick them, the vitamin C will degrade after a few days. So if you can freshly pick them in your house, then you're getting the utmost vitamin C. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to try it as soon as I can get enough of these, where I'm going to make capers or pickled red buds. So, traditional capers in the Mediterranean are flower buds that are packed in salt for a couple of weeks, and then they're in a brine for preservation. So I've come to find a couple recipes for red bud capers. So I'm going to be trying that out. And that's a really good way to preserve them, since their lifespan is they're up here for maybe 2 or 3 weeks max. But there's lots of other recipes like red bud jelly and red bud syrup. They just typically have a little bit more sugar than I'm used to eating. Joan, that's an interesting fact. So Spring Beauty that we just went over is pollinated only by a single solitary bee. No kidding. Well, there must be a lot of bee action because they are everywhere. It's a good sign. All right, so then we have violets, and violets are gorgeous. This is a violet simple syrup up here. And you can also, if you're not so much into sugar, you can make a violet vinegar, where you would take a white vinegar. I think I did apple cider vinegar last year. It didn't come out as striking as this because the apple cider vinegar is already a little colored. But you can just soak these flowers in vinegar for a few days until you get this color, strain them, and then use that on various foods. Or, as I like to do, just throw them on top of dinner. So here's a wild dinner with some chickweed, some violets, some fiddlehead ferns, some morel mushrooms. I think that was Easter last year. So these purple violets are the most common here in Maryland, but there are lookalikes, so it's best to have a field guide or get really comfortable with ID. So one of the distinguishing factors here is the heart-shaped leaf. You can see this leaf is in a beautiful little heart shape, and as it comes up, it looks like a heart too. So there's also, as you can see down here, there's yellow violets. There's white violets, but I haven't seen a lot of those. We have certainly a lot of the purple and yellow though. So these are going to wilt pretty quickly. So if you're out harvesting them, you want to have a plan for them that evening or within the next day. You can put them in water to preserve them for at least a couple of days. But as they sit in the water, the beautiful color will go into the water and you'll lose it from the violet. So also these little heart-shaped leaves can be eaten. Don't eat the stems though. So you want to literally pick the leaf right off of the stem, leave the stem behind. And when you get them young like this, when they're first coming out of the ground this time of year, they taste very, very similar to spinach. So you can cook them like spinach 100% or add them to a saute with spinach. There's more people that say that raw violet leaves give them a little scratchy throat. So you can eat them raw, but use that rule of thumb. If it's a new food for you, just take a little nibble, see how it sits with you. And then if you have no issue, the next day you can eat more of it. But if you just want to be safe, think about these violet greens as a sauteable or cooked green. In terms of herbal medicine, the whole plant or the leaves and the flower have always really been used for dry hacking cough. And it also is a lymphatic tonic. So the lymph system is something that really needs a lot of support in the human body because it's where we get rid of toxins and it doesn't have a pump. You know, if you think about our cardiovascular system and our blood, it gets pumped every second almost by our heart, right? So it's constantly being shuttled around the body with a pump. Our lymphatic system doesn't have anything like that. It literally has the movement of our body. So if we tend to be a little bit more sedentary, or we just don't get as much movement as we'd like, our lymphatic system likely needs some help. So eating foods like this can be very helpful for overall detoxification. I think everybody knows this. So several parts of the plant are used, and it's one of the most widely used plants in many cultures and societies, used both as food and as medicine. So I really like to use the flowers this time of year. They're just coming up and they're nice and tightly packed, and they're sweeter this time of year. As we get into the summer, as it heats up, they get more bitter. So now's the perfect time to enjoy these dandelion flowers. You can pick apart the flowers, like you see these little petals here, and you can sprinkle them on top of salad. You could also make tea with them. So a few heads of dandelion in a cup, and then take some hot boiling water, pour it on top of that. We use dandelion in herbal medicine to support fluid balance. So typically if someone was retaining fluid, we would give them dandelion leaf and dandelion flower. It's very high in potassium as well. Not a lot of foods are high in potassium. The leaves are extremely bitter, but extremely medicinal. The leaves have been used in many cultures for supporting liver health. So with the leaves, if you are of a hardy constitution, you could eat them raw, or you could saute them with other greens. You probably want to see how you respond to them in terms of taste, because some people are what we call super tasters. They taste bitter components more aggressively than other people. So if you're a super taster, this might be a little too aggressive for you. I love this recipe for dandelion fritters. It's a really neat way to use them up this time of year. Okay, so just in time. So I wanted to show you where some of the places where I learned, because this was all new to me about 12 years ago. And it's just been this journey of every year learning a new plant, learning a new mushroom, and really getting nerdy with it. So my top recommendation, let me just close this screen, and I'm going to share my web browser with you too, so you can see. All right, so this is a YouTube channel hosted by a forager from Pennsylvania, and he has a channel called Learn Your Land. And he is great because he really breaks it down for beginners, but it's also wonderful for people like me who are sort of in the middle. Definitely not an expert, but not a beginner anymore. And he goes through plants and mushrooms. So he's got lots of playlists. Here's a little video about stinging nettles, for example. Lots about mushrooms. So right now is morel season, or almost. We're almost in morel season. That's this mushroom right here, the one that looks like a funky little brain. And so maybe you want to check out some of those videos later today or this weekend. They should be popping up. They're probably up right now, but they're probably only this big. So I would think in the next 2 to 3 weeks would be your best chance of finding these mushrooms that are elusive. They're super elusive, and they're only up for a couple of weeks every year. And so us foragers out there, it's like morel madness. You know, we're all like crazed looking for them because they're super delicious. And when you try to buy them in the store, they're just ridiculously expensive. So it'd be awesome if you guys found a couple and get to try it this year. Another resource, there's this website here that's based on plants in Denmark, but there's a lot of overlap with what they have and what we have. So I like how they break it down into months.
Oh,
Now, we're not on the ocean, so we're not going to find bladderwrack, but here's common nettle, for example. and where to find it, when to find it, how to spot it, how to pick it, risk of misidentifying. This one, there's no risk. And then it gives you some, ingredients or recipes. Now this is chef driven. This is like, this is definitely a chef's website. So this isn't stuff that I'm making at home, but it's pretty. So it's fun to look at. And then this website and this gentleman, Alan Burgo, is one of my favorites. He has a wonderful blog. He's coming out with a book. He has great videos, and he's just super passionate about wild food, so even goose eggs. So I've learned so much from him. He definitely has some chef-driven recipes, but there's a lot of simple recipes as well. Ooh, crab stuffed merle. That's a lovely little Maryland delight. Okay, and then a couple of books that I would recommend. This classic book here, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, it came out in 1962, so it's a little outdated, but it's a really wonderful, entertaining read by Euell Gibbons. It's not the best in terms of this is exactly what the plant looks like. It's not the best in terms of recipes, but it's entertaining if you want something like that. In terms of really great guidebooks, anything by Samuel Thayer. He's just an amazing botanist and forager. He's written 2 great books, The Nature's Garden and The Forager's Harvest. And then if you're just interested in this sort of lifestyle of living more efficiently off the land, I recommend this book by Landon Cook called Fat of the Land. It's less about how to identify and the basics, but it's more about the culture around foraging. And he's based out of the Pacific Northwest. So it's about his adventures in foraging in like Seattle Sound. So it's like a lot of seafood, but there's also a lot of mushrooms and plants. And he's just a fantastic writer, very entertaining. And he always gets me excited in the winter. So I'll read these books in the winter to get ready mentally for the spring. All right, with that said, that's the end of the presentation. And I would love to spend the last 6 or so minutes opening up the floor for questions and anything I didn't get to go over that you want to know about.
Hey, Carrie, Rich, how long do you cook your the watercress?
Not long at all. There's a blanching technique that you can use. So blanching would be boiling a big pot of water with salt. It's always good to add some salt to blanch water because it'll infuse something into the food, a little flavor. So I will blanch it maybe for 2 max minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. And then ideally I would take that hot watercress out of the blanched water and put it into a cold bath. So like water with ice in it. That way it would stop it from cooking. Because it's such a delicate green that I really don't want to mush it up.
Yeah, I was interested in the water contamination, and that being a question. That's enough to take care of any toxicity that may occur in the stream from animal waste, etc.
Yeah, yep, 1 or 2 minutes is enough. And it's always recommended to use a big pot of water. So if you have a little amount of watercress, just use the biggest pot possible. If you have a lot of watercress, like I often end up having, I will use my biggest soup pot, but then I'll dump out blanch water and do it again in rounds. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask also, is there a quantity that you want to not overdo? Anyone say, I heard the part about when you're first having it, test yourself, but once you say you're okay with it, is there a certain amount that you don't want to, overindulge in a particular setting, or once a day, twice a day, something like that?
In terms of the greens, there's nothing I can think of that would be an issue. I didn't go over it, but sorrel is a green that I would caution you from overeating because sorrel is really high in oxalic acid.
Right.
Yeah, and there's actually been case studies of people dying in France when they were served like lots and lots of sorrel. In France, it's used often as soup, and so they'll puree like a pound of it, and then people are eating it. But that's not going to happen with any of the greens that I'm recommending. These are all pretty low oxalate greens.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, and
Here-
watercress is invasive. I don't know if it's actually invasive, but it's proliferative. Like it's everywhere. So there's no danger in like over harvesting that. As long as you harvest it and leave the roots in the water, it's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow back.
Great, great. Thanks a lot. That's a good one for me.
Sure. Yeah, there's
Hey, Carrie, this is Joan. I just had a follow-up question to the amounts. How much do you need to consume in order to get the nutritional benefit from some of these? I know also about starting slow, but a flower or two, or are you needing a cup of them to get the nutritional benefit? What's the story there?
That's $1 million question. And I think I used to ask myself that a lot more and want to figure it out. And then I don't know. I spend my life thinking about nutrition, and this to me is more about joy and getting outside and seeing beautiful things. And so I'm trying to think a little less about it as nutrition, but knowing that these are packed with so much more nutrition than I could get in the grocery store. So even if I'm getting a couple here and there, I'm happy with that. So try to think about it that way.
That's a good way to think about it. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So that's like saying it's a supplement. You're adding it to your other greens from the stores and it boosts your nutrition then.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And when these things are abundant and in season, I'm eating so much of them. And then when they're not there anymore, I'm not. So it's sort of like I'm front loading nutrition, I guess. But then I try to use the preservation techniques like making a lot of watercress dough, for example, and freezing it for use throughout the year. Oh, and nettles freeze really well. So if you just blanch nettles and then roll them into a ball, like pack them into a ball, you can freeze that whole ball of nettles in the freezer. And so, yeah, you can enjoy them throughout the year. Someone had a question, and this is great. It reminded me of something else I wanted to show you. How do I wash my greens without them wilting? Yeah, some of the greens, when I'm out in the fields, it's hot out there, and then, they're wilting. But as long as you get them home within a few hours and put them in cold water, they will perk right up, especially watercress. So the kind of salad spinner that I use is something like this, where you can see that there's a colander in the center of it. Because, here's a good way to look at it. Yeah, so I can put all of my greens in here, and then I put that inside of the salad spinner, fill that whole thing up with water and let them chill there. Let them just rehydrate. And then I can get my hands in there and jostle them up in hopes that it'll dislodge anything on them. And then you can pick up that basket of greens and then discard the water and then start over. It's just the most efficient way I found to deal with these. And I try to get the biggest salad spinner possible because they make smaller ones, but you can get bigger ones.
It sounds,
Go ahead,
okay.
Melissa.
I was just,
Hold on.
Go ahead, Adele.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like don't throw that water away. Go water your garden or plants in your yard.
Yeah.
You're bringing good stuff from the woods, right? So you want to inoculate your ground around your house too.
Yeah, good call. Because there's microbes and there's maybe fungi and there's synergistic relationships going on in that water. Melissa, go ahead with that question.
So this is brand new to me. I was interested because a friend introduced me to the garlic mustard greens last summer, and it was really fun. And so when I saw that you were offering this, I was like, what? There are all these other things too in the area. So as I'm throughout your presentation, I realized like how much there is to learn, and I appreciate what you said about how many years you've been doing this, because I'm realizing, okay, I don't have to know it all at once. I can do a little bit year by year. I'm thinking, what I was wondering is if you know of like almost like a calendar that shows you when things are typically in season. So if I know that I'm gonna have time to go for a walk or a hike on Saturday, I can be like, oh, what should I learn about this weekend that might be out there?
Maybe there is one. I don't know of one off the top of my head. But I think over time, you'll you'll start to realize when things come up, and it gets ingrained in there. You have this like photographic memory when you get back out there the next year, you're like, oh, it's spring and there's the red buds again. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. Like literally 12 years of just having fun and learning. And each year I learn a new plant. There's so much to learn, and a new mushroom. But
Yeah.
I can check. I can see. Who's great is Adam Herringer. He tends to release videos in real time as we're coming up to season. So he would be a great resource
Great.
to subscribe to and see when his videos are coming out.
I already subscribed when you introduced it, so I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, he has this great one on just overlooked wild edible fruits. Yeah, and so I could technically do one of these every season, or there's micro seasons within our seasons too. Like April is like all the things are coming up, but then May is a little bit of a lull month where we're in between spring and summer. So there's so much. Maybe I'll do one in the middle of the summer too, and hopefully we can do one in person at some point. All right, so there's another question. Is there a specific book you like that references wild mushrooms with great identifying info? Yes. Well, this one is great for videos. He's where I learned a lot of my mushroom ID stuff. So he has a whole playlist on mushrooms, edible mushrooms here. And then in terms of a field
Many of our
guide,
patients.
a field guide for mushrooms in this area. Oh, I forget the name of it, but I can put it in the resources. There's a really funny book, All That the Rain Promises and More. I have this on my coffee table. It's hilarious. I don't know if you guys can see the picture of it. Try to get it bigger. This is a great guide. Although based on the West Coast, it's still pretty good for the East Coast. The author is in a symphony orchestra, and I guess on the way to one of his gigs, he saw a chicken in the woods mushroom on the road and ran out with his trombone. And there's just a lot of comedy in the book. And then state parks are okay. Yes, state parks are okay most of the time. Ramps, you cannot forage in state parks. National parks, just consider no foraging on national parks. And one last question, nettles. Oh yeah, so the name urticaria, or it's close to that. I think that's because it causes skin irritation. So I think that's where it comes from. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to save this recording in the Healthy website where you signed up for this. So if you want to review any information, and you all have the PowerPoint. If you have any questions after the fact, you have my email, so send them my way. And thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you the best out in the woods. I'm so glad you're getting into this. It's the gift that keeps on giving for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Carrie.
Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Carrie.
Thanks.